There is a major law that has passed in California. We are doing a reform to CEQA, which a lot of developers and a lot of people in the real estate have been complaining about. Can you tell us what this reform is about?
Well, CEQA had to do with the Environmental Quality Act that was done years and years ago, I think back actually during Reagan when he was governor. I'm 90% sure that's when it was. But it was basically that when you built something, you had to kind of say what the environmental impacts would be, how much traffic would be there, how about left-hand turn pockets, how many more kids would be impacted going to schools with the new neighborhood. It's basically kind of saying in the environmentally what impacts there be in the community. The problem with it over the years...
For development, right?
For
when
development.
When you build a community,
right.
new development.
And so when you build houses or a shopping center or something, there's going to be impacts on the community. What's happened over time is not only did they find more and more impacts down to, some bug or a bird or something you never heard of before, but they also put it upon the development to say, now you got to solve for that impact. It wasn't that way in the beginning. And so then it gets very complicated to how do you solve for these things. And the process doesn't take 6 months. It takes a year, 2 or 3 or 4 years. And then when you get to the end of the process, anybody in California can sue you, not the next door neighbors or the people that are affected, but anybody could sue you. So then the process of CEQA was kind of twisted around to, and a lot of it was the labor unions. They were basically saying, we're going to sue you and kill your project unless you make this project a union project with higher wages and all different other standards. And so for a lot of projects, that didn't make any sense, and it would just kill the project. Even when you had situations being sued by some neighborhood group, many times they were funded by the labor unions. And so they'd say, you have a traffic problem, you have this problem, or whatever the problem was. But as soon as you agreed to make it a union job with the higher wages and all that, all the environmental problems just magically disappeared. And they would go ahead and approve the project. What's happened here now with this new law, it was put together, the governor, when I first read it, I said, oh, there's got to be some tricks in this thing of how they're, hiding what the unions got. But he didn't do it. He basically, restricted what CEQA could be used for, how it could slow down the process, what kind of timelines cities have to use to approve a project. And, except for like extremely large buildings or buildings that were subsidized housing where the government was giving money, the unions don't have the ability just to go ahead and shut it down because it won't be allowed anymore. They didn't really get a lot out of it. And so, hats off to the governor to finally, and how he got it passed was he made it a trailer bill to the budget and just said, this law goes with the budget. If you don't pass the budget, this doesn't go through. If you pass the budget, this does go through. So it's kind of one of those things where the pressure was put on everybody just to get it done.
And it immediately goes into effect, right?
Pretty quick, yeah. I don't know the exact date on it, but in the development world, things take years. So anything that's going to kick in, it's going to affect everybody.
What's going to be the impact of this? So you've been a developer, you've been a mayor, so you kind of know what...
A couple things will happen if it goes the way it was written and the way it was planned, and you never know, people will start fighting these things after they've been approved, but if it goes as planned, you're going to see the marketplace pick up where developers will say, that project that I was looking at before was close, kind of questionable, kind of made sense, didn't make sense, but now that all of a sudden this 1, 2, 3 year fight is going to be over with, it's not going to take that long, it's worth taking the risk of tying up the property, getting a contract to do it, and spending the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to get it approved because the time frame is so much shorter. So I would think that if this thing does what it's supposed to do, you're going to see a lot more projects, especially for housing, come on board that wouldn't have come on board otherwise.
Some people are concerned about congestion and traffic, and how much of those studies will go into parking? How much of that will go into this?
CEQA is just to tell you where all the problems are. And again, it was kind of, every issue that you could ever create or think of was figured into it, and it was just kind of ridiculous. It made no sense. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the development has to solve those problems. The local jurisdiction can say, yeah, we see all these impacts, and we're willing to live with those impacts, and they can just go ahead and approve the project. The CEQA process just told you what they were. And a lot of times you go, well, that doesn't mean anything, I really don't care. But as far as getting developments approved, it'll make difference. Now, with regards to the densities and all those issues, that's a whole nother thing that the state legislature has gotten involved in, to force cities to rezone properties for housing at much higher density levels than we had before. I mean, when you say to people in California, we used to have a thing called R1 zoning. R1 is just single family residences, a 3, 4, 5, 6,000 square foot lot, kind of your suburban neighborhood. You know, all your suburban counties had it. You could build so many houses on so many acres, and it was just a suburban thing. What the state did a couple of years ago is they said all lots now are allowed to have 2 units. And they have, you know, they call them granny flats or whatever they want to call them.
ADUs.
ADUs, auxiliary development units, whatever, they have different names for them. The problem that's happened with that is you have situations where neighborhoods that had all single family houses have now been approved to put another apartment in the backyard or to attach it. And then the problem that they had when they first put it in is many people didn't do it, and the reason is that the codes in the cities had for parking. They'd say, well, you're going to put another unit in the back, you need 1 or 2 more parking spaces. So then the state said, oh, that's the problem? Fine, we'll get rid of all parking requirements. So now, if you had your 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a double-car garage and you illegally converted the garage to an apartment, you now can get that made legal. You know, go through some things for health and safety, fire codes, that kind of stuff. But that garage now becomes an apartment, and it doesn't need any parking. And in fact, there were 2 parking spaces in the garage. They're gone now. And so the whole parking thing doesn't mean anything. Now, as people slowly build these units in different neighborhoods, you'll start to notice the parking problem. But clearly, if everybody put a second apartment on their suburban lot, there'd be no place for the cars. I mean, literally, there's not enough room in front of a house on a 50-foot wide lot with a driveway and how much space to put the additional cars in. They just don't exist.
So you mentioned increasing density, and now this law, the new law, the CEQA reform, it allows for development that's more organized, right? Versus having these kind of lots in your backyard, versus having this kind of housing in your backyard, like the ADUs. Do you think this kind of housing is better, the developments that are more organized? Or
I don't know that it's better, more organized. I mean, clearly, you know, building a project to have 2 or 3 or 4 years of litigation, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's just a waste of everybody's time and energy. You know, a developer can't buy the property or close escrow on the property until they know it's entitled. A seller only wants to wait so long. I mean, it's just kind of a very inefficient, bad way to run a railroad. I mean, we're going to do business. Let's do it so that it makes some sense. So in that aspect, it makes it.